China has stopped pretending to be neutral and, you could say, has officially joined Russia's war against Ukraine. At the same time, Beijing carried out a demonstrative ballistic missile launch toward Australia to show off its growing nuclear capabilities. A joint investigation by 3 publications, Der Spiegel, The Insider, and Le Monde, showed that China's cooperation with Russia goes far beyond supplying Russia with dual-use goods. The close military cooperation between the two countries directly linked to the war against Ukraine has been going on for at least 3 years. And it's not just about closed-door exercises where Russian soldiers were trained for the war against Ukraine. No, that's minor stuff. The Chinese and Russian militaries are secretly cooperating in the field of space weaponry and satellite destruction. Integrated air and missile defense systems, autonomous loitering munitions operating in swarm mode, next-generation armored vehicles, and issues in the field of military aviation. And most importantly, China is helping Russia develop technology to counter Starlink communications in order to blind the Ukrainian armed forces. And at the same time, China conducted an extremely rare test of a ballistic missile launched from a nuclear submarine in the western part of the Pacific Ocean. Such a launch was the first in many decades and has already caused concern in the United States of America, Japan, Australia, Taiwan, and other countries in the Indo-Pacific region. And at the same time, China hypocritically stated that it had given an ultimatum to Vladimir Putin, ordering him not to use nuclear weapons in the war against Ukraine. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss together the issue of cooperation between China and Russia and how China is actually helping Russia on the battlefield to fight against Ukraine. Moreover, we will rely on official documents that have come into the possession of 3 publications at once: Der Spiegel, The Insider, and Le Monde. But before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and write any detailed comment under this video, so that as many viewers as possible can see this episode, because that's exactly how YouTube's algorithms work. And be sure to subscribe, because there are almost 300,000 of us already. Let's reach that milestone together. So, let's start with the cooperation between China and Russia. China has repeatedly stated that it remains neutral in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and calls for an end to the war. But a joint investigation by 3 publications, Der Spiegel, The Insider, and Le Monde, showed that it goes far beyond simply supplying Russia with dual-use goods. No, the close military cooperation between the two countries directly related to the war against Ukraine has been going on for at least 3 years. The 3 publications obtained documents from the Chinese-Russian Forum on military technical cooperation, within the framework of which meetings that were never publicized were held. These materials cover 5 areas: space weapons and satellite destruction, integrated air and missile defense systems, autonomous loitering munitions in swarm mode, next-generation armored vehicles, and military aviation. According to the declassified documents, China, as early as 2023, proposed actively countering Elon Musk's Starlink communications up to and including the direct destruction of satellites in orbit. When Elon Musk, at Ukraine's request, disabled the Starlink terminals used by Russian military personnel earlier this year, they began using Chinese solutions instead. Der Spiegel specifically reports on this. Since February 2026, radio towers have started appearing along the front line, allowing access to the internet and launching swarms of smart drones over Ukraine capable of changing targets right in flight. And as you can imagine, this is not a Russian development. No, this is pure assistance from Beijing. Recently, high-ranking Chinese officers were able to see this with their own eyes when they visited the Ukrainian front. And, as they stated, they were there as observers, but in reality they were actually studying the use of this technology in combat conditions. In a document obtained by 3 publications, it is stated that researchers from the China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation provided the Russians with a report claiming that Starlink has already created a so-called space blockade by saturating low Earth orbit and key parts of the electromagnetic spectrum in such a way that it eliminates the possibility of competition. That's why they called it aggression and explained why it's necessary to fight against this system and Elon Musk's technology. The Chinese suggested to the Russians that they should first go after Starlink through legal channels in various international organizations, claiming that it's a monopoly, that it's an act of aggression, that it's an attempt to strangle the whole world with their technologies, and so on and so forth. In short, to put as much legal pressure on Starlink as possible. After that, China and Russia plan to occupy the frequency spectrum and orbits that will be freed up, so that Elon Musk simply can't expand his Starlink system, meaning to occupy the frequencies needed for Starlink's expansion. And after that, move on to physical destruction. First, these are cyber attacks on Starlink through civilian user terminals, and that's in this document. It is directly proposed to use fake access, virus infection, and exploiting vulnerabilities. And also, researchers from China suggested moving on to destroying Starlink satellites in orbit. But at this stage, we're talking about cheap Chinese interceptors destroying expensive American terminals. In 2025, a Chinese delegation arrived in Moscow. It was led by Colonel Tong Xiaofeng from the Central Military Commission, who is responsible for procurement and has direct access to China's highest military authority. In May of that year, the Chinese delegation visited the Tikhomirov Instrument Engineering Research Institute in Zhukovsky. This radar design institute, among other things, is responsible for developing the Belka radar for the Su-57 fighter jets and the main components of the latest Russian air defense systems. On the Russian side, the most prominent delegate was Pavel Sozinov. He is the chief designer of Almazante, the most experienced weapons designer in the Russian air defense system. He is responsible for the entire line of S-300, S-400 and S-500 surface-to-air missile systems. And as stated in the documents, he is one of the key figures in the joint program. This is an integrated next-generation air and missile defense system. It is designed to intercept ballistic missiles, maneuvering warheads, and hypersonic missiles at the final stage of flight. According to the plan, the system should intercept medium-range ballistic missiles at distances of up to 4,000 kilometers. In addition, it is supposed to handle targets maneuvering with lateral acceleration of up to 25 g. It should also intercept hypersonic missiles at altitudes of up to 40 kilometers. Now here's a crucial point, and I'll give you a quote from the Insider publication. In a presentation at the forum by researcher Li Rong from the Academy of Military Sciences of the People's Liberation Army of China, it was proposed to systematically provide China with data on the combat operations of Russian drones in Ukraine. China has 160 types of loitering munitions from more than 50 manufacturers, but it has almost no real combat experience using any of them. Russia, on the other hand, has data on the combat use of drones. The proposal is to formalize the exchange. Russia shares battlefield knowledge, while China provides artificial intelligence technologies and mass production resources for the joint development of the next generation of autonomous swarm munitions. The results of this agreement are already visible during the war in Ukraine. The autonomous V-2U drone used by Russian forces in Ukraine operates on Chinese artificial intelligence modules, Chinese LiDAR sensors, Chinese batteries, and Chinese solid-state drives. Component supply is already established. And so participants at the forum in Guangzhou discussed how China's engineering solutions would essentially be tested on the battlefield in Ukraine. In addition, the Russians, as has already been proven in these documents, are handing over the remains of destroyed armored vehicles to the Chinese for research. The Chinese are conducting a detailed assessment of the destruction of Russian armored vehicles in Ukraine using Javelin and NLAW anti-tank missile systems, Bayraktar TB2 drones, Switchblade 600 and HIMARS systems. And here is another quote from the investigation. In the speaker's notes, it is stated directly that, faced with sanctions, especially current restrictions on chips and raw materials, China and Russia should make mutual use of each other's supply channels to solve the problem of bottlenecks. It is implied that China supplies microchips and electronics, while Russia provides raw materials and those components that China has difficulty accessing due to Western sanctions. As a result, investigators conclude that a military partnership is forming between Moscow and Beijing based on a division of labor. Russia shares its war experience, while China supplies electronics, semiconductors, and equipment. What Russia is learning in Ukraine, China will be able to apply in the event of a possible attack on Taiwan. What China develops, Russia uses on the battlefield against Ukraine. But let's get back to Starlink. As Der Spiegel reports, there is strong evidence that work on plans to counter Starlink is actively continuing. Various publications have appeared in China discussing specific measures ranging from laser weapons to microwave weapons. Similar attempts are being noted in Russia as well. In addition, Russia is deploying an electronic warfare system called Volna Kupol Garant, which emits a powerful enough signal to disrupt Starlink operations over an area of about 20 square kilometers. By the way, according to the advisor to the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Serhiy Bezkresny, about 10 such systems have already been detected at the front, and the Ukrainian armed forces are trying to destroy them with their drones. And it's obvious that such a system is also the result of cooperation between Russia and China. At the same time, China conducted an extremely rare test of a ballistic missile launched from a nuclear submarine in the western part of the Pacific Ocean. Such a launch was the first in many years, possibly even decades, and has already caused concern in the US, Japan, Australia, Taiwan, and other countries in the Indo-Pacific region. The Chinese People's Liberation Army reported that back on July 6, a strategic nuclear submarine successfully launched a missile with a training warhead. According to the official version, it accurately hit the designated area in the open sea. Beijing also emphasized that it had warned other countries in advance and that the launch was not directed against any particular country. At the same time, the Chinese authorities did not disclose which specific submarine and which specific missile were involved in these tests. Analysts suggest that it is one of the modern JL-2 or JL-3 ballistic missiles which are deployed on Type 094 nuclear submarines. Currently, China has at least 6 such submarines, 2 more are under construction, and the new generation Type 096 is still under development. According to Pentagon estimates, the JL-2 missile has a range of about 7,200 kilometers, while the JL-3 can hit targets up to 10,000 kilometers away. Both missiles are believed to be capable of carrying multiple independently targetable nuclear warheads. The official launch site hasn't been revealed. China issued a navigation warning simultaneously in the Yellow Sea area and in the South China Sea. For example, Taiwanese officials stated that the missile flew past the Philippines, while the Japanese side confirmed receiving the warning but did not report whether the missile crossed their country's airspace. And only on July 9th did researchers from the Center for Strategic and International Studies publish a map of the recent Chinese ballistic missile launch. It was created based on official navigation warnings about closed sea areas, and on this map the pink safety zones are clearly visible. They clearly show the entire flight path of the missile. The launch took place from the Bohai Gulf and the waters south of Taiwan. Next, the missile dropped its spent stages in the Philippine Sea and near Japan. The final target was located in the open ocean to the northeast of Australia near Fiji. And now, this test officially confirms the sharp increase in Beijing's nuclear capabilities. Moreover, experts believe that the tests demonstrate China's so-called bastion strategy. It involves launching ballistic missiles from well-protected coastal areas where nuclear submarines are protected by their own fleet and air cover. This concept increases their survivability and guarantees the ability to deliver a retaliatory strike even after an enemy attack. Analysts also note that this launch was one of the largest demonstrations of the naval component of the Chinese nuclear triad. Last year, Beijing already attracted attention by launching a DF-31 intercontinental ballistic missile toward the Pacific Ocean, and now has confirmed its readiness to actively use the submarine component of its strategic forces. The test took place amid a large-scale modernization of China's nuclear arsenal, and according to the Pentagon, China currently possesses about 600 nuclear warheads, and despite a slight slowdown in production rates, by 2030 it may increase their number to more than 1,000. At the same time, Beijing is actively expanding its submarine fleet. According to analysts from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, in just the past few years, China has launched about 10 new submarines and already surpasses the United States in the total number of submarines. And against the backdrop of all this, China made a hypocritical statement about Russia's war against Ukraine. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, stated the day before that China, for the first time, issued Russia a stern warning in the form of an ultimatum against any thoughts of using nuclear weapons. Here is a quote from Zelensky. "It is very important to emphasize that not only Europeans, not only America, but also China, and it seems to me that this is the first time. They responded very clearly and very firmly, as I was told, in the form of an ultimatum that there cannot even be any opinions about the use of nuclear weapons." I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.